Are you thinking about buying a house in Florida that has tenants in there? Well, before you do, you want to watch this video because I'm going to go over the 7 mistakes that I see buyers make when they are buying a house and it has tenants and they think, what could go wrong? I will tell you what can go wrong. So make sure you get your drink because this is going to be a good long story and we're going to have lots of examples of me breaking down for you exactly what can go wrong so that you do not step on these landmines and make them your problems. First up on what goes wrong is you're wondering where are the photos and you're thinking, I'm online, the area looks great, the house I think looks great, but there are no photos, and you're frustrated as a buyer because you can't make a decision if you want to move forward with seeing the house because you're looking for those interior photos. Well, let me tell you something. Florida law protects tenants. We have tenant laws, and tenants have the right to say, no, you can't come into my house and photograph my personal belongings. I am not going to allow that. So the best that you can get are the exterior photos because that's all you can get. And so you're not going to see the interior photos, which also means that a real estate agent cannot go into that home and film those interior photos for you, nor can they take pictures because a tenant has already said no. At best, you might be able to do like a live video so that you can see what the photos look like and you can see the layout of the house, but you can't get like video or photos because they've already said no. So what you're seeing online is all that there is. Now, another thing with the photos that you're seeing online is you're saying, okay, well, the photos don't look very good. The tenant doesn't care. The tenant isn't selling the house. They're being inconvenienced by having to getting the house ready and people wanting to come by and look at it. So many of them just don't. They just don't care. They're like, okay, if I agree to photos, you're getting what you get. I am not doing anything for them. So I will tell you many times it's better to not even have photos of the interior of the house because sometimes those photos are not good. They're not good because of what's going on inside the house. So real story for you. I represented a seller who had a property that had a tenant in there. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo. They decided they were tired of being landlords and they wanted to sell it. So I went to the property and they said, hey, could you get some interior photos for the listing? I said, no problem. I don't know what I was thinking. Got to the property, finally got inside, and it was a nightmare. It was a college kid. He partied all the time. There was alcohol bottles everywhere. There was drug stuff everywhere. There were sex things everywhere. Old food everywhere. It was disgusting. And thank goodness you can't smell in photos because it smelled terrible. Kid was living his best life. He had every right to. And so I was like, we're not going to have any interior photos because if I post these online, no one's going to see this property. Not ever. And so we did not have interior photos. And so that is why you'll either see no photos because the tenant is saying absolutely hard no, or the photos of the way the tenant lives. It's just not something that should be out there. So many times when you're looking at a property that does have a tenant in there, you're going to kind of go in blind until you're actually physically able to get into the house. So next up, number 2. So you finally decide, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take a chance and I want to go ahead and see this house. And you think to yourself, you know what, I've got a couple hours Thursday at noon on my lunch break. I'll just go ahead and see it then. You ask your real estate agent to set it up for you, and your real estate agent comes back and they say, okay, you got 2 showing availabilities. You got Friday at 8 p.m. and you got Sunday at 10 a.m. And you're thinking to yourself, whoa, that doesn't work for me. I want to see the house. They need to make it available. No, they don't. So here is where it gets really, really interesting. Florida law protects tenants. Remember, I told you there's tenant law. A tenant has to be notified no less than 24 hours in advance if someone is going to access the property. So you're saying, well, you know what? It's Tuesday. We're going to tell the tenant that we're going by on Thursday and we're going to go by at noon. That is well over 24 hours. So they have to let us in, right? Yes, you could push the issue and say you've given them the required 24-hour notice, so they have to let you in, but not every seller is going to push that hard. And I'm going to cover all of that. So just bear with me here. Imagine that you're the tenant. Maybe there's a big dog at the property, or the children are sleeping at that time, or they work from home. If they were the end seller, like was selling the house, they would make arrangements and they would work around the buyer's schedule. But remember, they're the tenant. They don't care if it sells or not. If it doesn't sell, they might get to stay there longer. buyer. So they don't care if you, the buyer, are inconvenienced. They don't want to be inconvenienced. So oftentimes they say that's not a good time. Many times sellers will say, you know what, I want to be home so I know who's entering the property and I know who's got access to my stuff. They have every right to do that. And so they may say that doesn't work for me. Again, they could have legitimate reasons that are going on that they can't allow the showing at that time. Now, why would a seller not force the issue? Well, the tenant is still there and they're still paying rent. And they are worried that, well, what if I make the tenant angry? What if the tenant stops paying rent? What if the tenant makes the property just so disgusting when the buyers come by that nobody is going to ever want to buy it? So the seller and the listing agent are trying very, very hard to keep the buyer happy so that the buyer is willing to work with the agents to get showings of the property. It's a very delicate game. Now, in situations, yes, some people do push the issue and it is going to be what happens, but it can become very combative and then it's not good for all people involved. So here's a few things that can happen if you push the issue. You could get to the property and find out that the tenant will not provide access. They will not let you in. Or the tenant forgets that you were coming by and they didn't leave the key out. So trying to force somebody into a showing can also backfire, and then you've wasted your time coming across town or planning your trip and you still can't get in. Now, a real situation I had with one of mine is we had a tenant that was doing that. I had a listing and the tenant did not want to move. They hoped that the seller would never sell the property and so they would get to stay there. But the seller was over it and they were like, nope, I'm going to sell this property, put a lockbox on the property, give them the required 24 hours notice to show the property, and then access the lockbox, get in and show the property. That is what we did. Very awkward, very weird. I came in to do a showing one time. I see them through the window. They're sitting on the couch. The entire family is sitting on the couch and they're watching TV and I can see them in the window. I am banging on the door, just banging on the door. I'm like, hello, realtor, I'm here to show the property. Buyers are standing behind me. They don't move. I let myself in. They're sitting there on the couch. They're watching the TV. They're just like this. It's so weird. Buyers are uncomfortable. I am uncomfortable. We finally get the showing done and then the buyers actually made an offer on that property and bought it. It's still very weird, but it wasn't a good situation for anybody. Those buyers were totally cool. They were going to buy the property no matter what, but that's not every single buyer. Now, I don't know what happened with the tenant, if they, made it difficult as far as paying rent or not, but that is something that the sellers are worried about. And so that's why, while you as the buyer are saying, make the showing convenient for me, the owner may be saying, I don't want to make the tenant so angry that they stop paying rent, or they make the showing so difficult that it's impossible to show, or they stand up the showing and then you're sitting there trying to get in and there's absolutely no way possible. Now, the third challenge that you're going to face is that many times the listing photos that you see online, if there were any, look nothing like the property when you're there. And you're looking at the listing photo on your phone and you're like, wow, this looked gorgeous. And this house does not. And what happened with that? Well, oftentimes what will happen is that the owner or the listing agent will have photos before the tenant moved in. Maybe these photos are when they listed it online previously for sale, or they listed it online for rent. And since then, the tenant might have lived in there 6 months, a year, maybe even 6 years. But remember, I said they didn't allow photography, or the photography was going to be so bad that they didn't want to use it. So they're using these older photos. Is it misrepresentation? I don't know if I would go that far, because the walls are still the walls. The layout is still the layout. If they haven't changed the kitchen or the appliances, I mean, it is the photo of the house, but it doesn't look like it did in that photo because someone's been living in there. So a lot of times you'll find that the photos and the listing don't match up. So remember the kid I told you about? We didn't have any photos, but if I had used the previous photos of that property and then you walked into that house to see how he was living, yeah, they weren't even close to each other. But you got what you got, and that's all that you can work with. So set the expectation that what you see online is probably going to look different from what you're going to see when the tenant is in there. Now, number 4 for you is a really, really big landmine, and many buyers do not consider this. And this is why you need to have a really, really good agent who understands purchasing a property in Florida that has a tenant in there. And this is your financing challenge. Many buyers buying a home are looking for that home to be their primary residence, which means depending on the loan product that you have to move in there between 30 and 60 days. It's going to depend on your loan product, so check with your lender on what their requirement is. But for the sake of this video, we're going to say 60 days. So your lender says, okay, you got to move it inside 60 days for it to be a primary residence. As such, you're going to be able to get a lower mortgage interest rate, and you're going to also have a lower down payment. Sounds great. But what you didn't read in the listing was the fine print that said that the tenant is going to be there for another 9 months. So now you cannot move in 60 days. And your lender says to you, well, you can't get this loan because it needs to be a primary residence. And so they say, well, if you still want to buy the house, you can buy the house, but instead of putting 5% down, you now have to put 20% down. Oh, and that interest rate, instead of it being 6.5%, it's going to be 7.25%, because now you're getting into investment loans when you are not able to move into the house inside of that 30 or 60 days and make it your primary residence. And that is something you really want to consider, because if you don't have that 20% down, then you may not qualify for a loan, or that house is just off the table for you because it's not even an option. So that is a big thing that many people miss when they are looking at a property that also has a tenant. So always make sure you know before you even waste your time seeing a property that you're not going to be able to finance. Find out first and foremost, when does the tenant's lease end? Hopefully it's listed in the listing description and it's very obvious right there, but if it's not and it says it is tenant occupied, always ask, when does the tenant's lease end, so that you will know if your loan product will work for that property, or you're going to have to consider a different loan product if you really want to buy that home. Now prepare yourself for this one, because it is a doozy. Number 5's challenge is, when you buy a house that has a tenant in there that is going to stay after closing, congratulations, welcome to the world of property management. Now this area is loaded with landmines, and I do property management for a living, as well as we have 4 rental properties ourselves. And this is not for the faint of heart. This is not something that you get into and say, you know what could go wrong? Let us break down what can go wrong. When you purchase a property with a tenant in there and you become suddenly a property manager literally overnight, you need to know tenant law, and you need to know that tenants have rights. You are not going to be able to claim ignorance and go, oh, I didn't know. You're supposed to know. So either you are going to become very knowledgeable on tenant law, or you're going to pay someone to become a property manager for you. And good property managers, they are not cheap, but they can save you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars from making a terrible mistake. One of the first things that you want to know about is you want to get a copy of the lease, because you are going to be obligated to all the terms and conditions that are in the lease. So you want to make sure you know what you are committing yourself to, and that you are in agreement with what you're going to commit yourself to. So first things first, get a copy of that lease. When you are reading that lease, make sure you understand things like who is responsible for paying the utilities. Don't just assume that the tenant is responsible for paying the utilities. Some places say, no, the owner is going to pay the utilities up to a certain point, and the utilities are in the owner's name, which means that you'll have to transfer them to your name. You also want to find out who's paying the lawn care, the pest control. If there's a pool, who's paying for the pool care, who's paying for the HOA fees. If there are security cameras, who's paying for that. You also want to know what kind of income is coming in or not. How much are they paying each month in rent, and all the expenses that are coming out of that? Are there things like parking fees that they have to pay for? Do they have a pet, and is there any money coming in for a pet fee versus an emotional support animal and a service animal, which you cannot charge for? You absolutely want to know if the tenant has a security deposit and if they've already prepaid last month's rent. And this is something that I see many people forget to look for, because when you close on that property, you want to make sure that the monies that have been prepaid to the current owner are transferred to you, because when the tenant moves out, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, well, where's my security deposit? And you're going to be looking at them saying, well, you didn't pay last month's rent. And they say, what I did, I gave it to the guy that had it before you bought it. And you go, well, he's got your money, not me. me. No, it's your issue now. So you want to make sure you look at the lease and you know what you're absolutely getting into. And the next thing is, and many people forget this too, do not forget this, is you want to get an estoppel letter. And so your title office will often be able to provide that or get that information for you. It's going to verify the information in the lease. So let me give you a true story here. I was helping somebody sell their property and they said, don't worry about it. The lease says that, you know, they've got no money in a security deposit and they haven't prepaid the last month's rent. Don't worry about it. So the estoppel letters were sent out to the tenants and it said, here's what we understand that the lease has said. Will you verify that this information is the same? And if it's not, let us know. Now, this is important because the tenant had lived there for 6 years. And so many things could have changed. There could have been verbal agreements that were not created into a contract. And so the tenant came back and they said, well, wait a second. When I renewed my lease, they made me put down a security deposit. So I actually do have $1,000 in a security deposit. And I also had to prepay the last month's rent, but they are paying for the pest control now. And they're also paying for the security monitoring. See, all those things were not in the lease. And had the estoppel letter not been done, then you, the buyer, taking over that would have been responsible for it. The owner forgot to share that additional document that was created later, but the tenant had it. It's important that you get all these documents because you are taking over the terms and conditions of the lease and any agreements that were made afterwards, and you've got to transfer the monies. Number 6, as far as a challenge that you might face, is something that many buyers do not think of, is that sometimes sellers are selling their properties because the tenants are such a nightmare that they want to get rid of them. And you think, well, why don't you just have the tenant move out? Well, sometimes those tenants are family members. And I'm laughing about this because we've had that situation. I represented an owner who had a family member living in the unit, and they did not want to be the bad guy and tell the family member that they had to get out. So instead, they just said, you know what, we're going to sell the unit, and sorry, you can go ahead and stay till the end of your lease term. The buyer had no idea how difficult this tenant was. Tenant paid on time. That wasn't an issue. But the tenant just had like a little bitty issue every single day that they just needed to report or complain about that the seller just no longer wanted to deal with. So good paying tenant, not really a problem, but just taking on that drama is something you need to think about. Because if you're getting called while you're at work and they're like,
hey, the light bulb's not working. Can you come over and take care of the light bulb? Or, you know, my back is really bad. I can't reach up there and get it. You don't mind, do you?
So it's those little things that you got to make sure you understand what kind of tenant that you were taking on, because I will tell you, doing property management, most problems come in after 5 o'clock and on the weekends. And you're wondering, why do they come in after 5 o'clock? Because that's when the tenant comes home. So the tenant comes home 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6 p.m. and that's when they discover the toilet has overflowed. The light switch isn't working. The AC is out. The dishwasher is no longer working. So that's when they find the problems and they are calling you now to take care of them. And of course, always on the weekends because that's when they're home. So when they're home and they're maybe working on a project, then they discover, oh, look, this isn't working now. Let me call them right now. And for the tenant, many times this is like an emergency. And that's that other part of the laws that you need to know is some things are an emergency and you got to decide and know which ones are and which ones are not. So if you say, well, you know what, I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you. I was on the boat this weekend, or I was at the UF game and I was having a good time. And they say, well, you know what, this is a 1-bedroom place and the toilet overflowed and now I had to call somebody out here and the bill's $1,000. I guess you're paying for it. And you go, wait a second, no, I'm not going to pay for that because I would have done differently. Well, having a place with one toilet and the toilet not working, that's an emergency. So if you're not there to answer the phone and take care of it and they have to, that's going to be your bill. So if you are going to purchase that property that's got a tenant in there, hopefully you get a chance to meet the tenant and find out if your personalities are going to be a match and you're going to be able to handle any kind of inquiries or calls that they're going to be making to you now. And last and certainly not least is number 7, other financial considerations. One thing you absolutely want to consider is what is going to be your new mortgage and what is the tenant paying in rent. Suddenly you have planned that your mortgage is going to be $3,000 a month and you find out that the tenant's rent is only $2,400 and they're going to live in there another 6 months. So now you're going to have to figure out, all right, how are you going to swing the difference between what they're paying you and also what your mortgage is? If you are getting a sweetheart of a deal, maybe you're like, you know what, I'll just pay the difference over 6 months because the deal is so good. But it may not be that good, or you may not have the extra funds to do so. And so that's something you really, really want to plan for, is that many times your new mortgage is not going to be covered by the existing rent, especially if there's other monies coming out of that rent for like pest control, pool care, lawn care, and all the other things. And that next financial consideration is, we talked about it earlier, you want to make sure there's some security deposit in there. Some places didn't take a security deposit, or they've used a security deposit for a rent month that they weren't able to pay. So you are seeing the tenant move out on moving day and the place is destroyed. And you think to yourself, oh no, I am going to charge all of that against the tenant's security deposit. First and foremost, you better have documentation. It wasn't like that when they moved in. And I don't mean that the owner has said to you, no, it was immaculate. It was just like the listing photos. Well, if the listing photos were taken 1 month or 1 year before the tenant moved in, and you are now at court because the tenant is suing you, and the judge says, well, they moved in on January 1st of 2020, where are the photos that you took on January 1st of 2020, so we know exactly what the condition of the unit was like when they moved in. And you pull up the listing photos that were taken 4 weeks earlier, and they're like, we don't know what happened. Maybe you trashed it. So you want to have very, very good documentation and security deposit, because you may be on the hook for paying for the repairs and the maintenance of the place when they move out and not being able to charge that against them. And that can be thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. Here's my pro tip for you. If you're looking at a property, first and foremost, check to see if it is tenant occupied. And if it is, find out when that lease ends, and does that date work with your mortgage. If you decide that you are going to go forward, even if it does work, and let's say they're going to be out on day 50 and that's going to be enough time, make sure all the documentation is in place. You have a lease, you know exactly what you're going to be responsible for, you know how much money needs to be transferred to you, because I will promise you the tenant will be looking for their money back, and that you know the condition of the property when they moved in, so that if anything does happen, you could possibly be able to take it out of their security deposit. Work with an agent who has experience, and I do mean experience with tenants and tenant law. Preferably, they already have their own properties that they've got, that they are already going through this, so none of this is foreign to them, or they have or work in a property management capacity as well, because this is not the time to go it alone. So if you're moving to Florida in the next 2 months or 2 years, and you are looking at any property in which there is a tenant, or you want to put a tenant into, feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to help. My link is in the description below, or scan the QR code and let's chat before you step on a landmine. Thanks, I'll see you in the next video.